Welcome to another episode of the Midnight Investigator, where we take an alternative look at moments in history. Now, I'm not sure what you'll think about this one because it sounds like folklore. Until you realize it was reported in the newspapers at the time, argued over in print, and never properly explained. In February 1855, Devon woke up to a question that still feels uncomfortable to ask out loud. Did the devil walk in Devon? This is the story locals would soon call the devil's footprints. It begins on the night of Thursday, the 8th into Friday, the 9th of February in 1855. Snow falls across East and South Devon around the estuary of Exeter and Exmouth, and by morning the world looks wiped clean, like someone has reset the landscape. But then people step outside and see that the blank page has already been written on. Not the usual muddle of boots and farm animals, but a repeating line of marks, described as hoof-like, set down one after another with a steady intent. As if, while Devon slept, something paced through the dark and left a message behind. This matters because people in rural Devon in 1855 weren't strangers to tracks in snow. They could read the ground the way you and I read a signpost. Farmers, laborers, villagers, they knew the difference between a boot and a hoof, between livestock, a dog, a fox, and the messy wandering marks of something hunting for food. So when more than one person starts saying, "These look like hooves," it lands differently. And when those same marks are found where no sensible animal should be walking, it stops being a curiosity and becomes a warning. A shared problem that creeps from field to lane to doorstep, and then from one household to the next. You can almost hear how it travels. One farmer mentions it to another, not as a joke, but as a nagging worry. The second farmer goes quiet because he's seen it too. Their wives speak to neighbors in low voices. Someone brings it up after church, and the conversation doesn't feel like gossip anymore. Then a third person says, "We've got them as well," and suddenly it isn't one odd set of marks in one field. It's a pattern, a presence. A story that starts moving faster than the thing that supposedly left the prints. The reports that matter most aren't pinned to one village. They cluster across South Devon, around the estuary near Exeter, with sightings turning up on both sides of the water and spreading into the surrounding countryside and coastal lanes. That geography matters because this isn't one isolated track that someone could dismiss and forget. It's multiple reports across one connected district, close enough that word would travel fast, like the whole area woke up to the same unsettling message written into the snow. And then come the details that give the story its bite. In the most repeated descriptions, the marks appear as a steady line, foot following foot, not a random scatter. Some accounts describe the trail continuing over awkward obstacles, including walls and even roofs, as if the thing making them either climbed without slipping, or moved in a way that ignored the normal rules. One correspondent later described the trail passing over the roofs of houses and over very high walls, and you can understand why people didn't just file it away as fox tracks and get on with their day. Now, whether every rooftop claim is accurate is a fair question, but here's what isn't in doubt. The story didn't stay at odd prints for long. People started searching for meaning, and in Victorian England there was an old, ready-made association waiting in the back of the mind. Hooves, the devil, a shape that carries a shadow with it. Within days, the supernatural framing is already being spoken out loud, and crucially, it's attributed to locals. On the 13th of February 1855, the Western Luminary, a Devon paper based in Exeter, prints an early report under a Dawlish heading. And in that report, the very superstitious are already saying it must be the marks of Old Nick. That's the moment the story steps over the line from strange to sinister, because once the devil has been named, every new print starts looking like confirmation. Old Nick is not some niche Devon phrase that appears from nowhere. It's an old English nickname for the devil, the kind of phrase people carried around without thinking. So when something in the snow looks like a hoof print, nobody needs to invent a devil narrative from scratch. The words are ready. The association is instant. The story doesn't have to be built. It simply rises to the surface. And then the press machine kicks in. A local paper prints it first, and the story gains heat. And by the 16th of February, 1855, it has reached the Times in London. That's the moment it stops being a Devon curiosity and becomes national conversation. The Times keeps the devil angle at arm's length by framing it as what the superstitious believe, but the idea is now in a London paper, and that gives it weight. It even notes the topic is being spoken about from pulpits, which tells you this wasn't just pub talk. It was getting under the skin of the community. This is where you can feel how Victorian journalism works. Papers are hungry. Curiosity sell. A strange local report is exactly the kind of thing that gets shared, clipped, repeated, and retold. And once it appears in a major London paper, it gains an authority of its own, even if the paper isn't claiming the devil is real. People read it and think, if the Times is printing it, something must have happened. And that feeling, that sense that the story is now official, feeds the fear. The mystery doesn't unfold over months out in the countryside. The shock belongs to that particular night and morning. But the conversation runs on because the newspapers keep turning it over. Regional papers add more locations and color over the following days. Then, on the 24th of February 1855, the Illustrated London News publishes the letter signed South Devon, along with an illustration of the prince. That illustration matters because it gives the public an image to hold on to. It fixes the story in the mind. It becomes the version people repeat, the proof people point at, even if it's only an engraving. And once the Illustrated London News opens its pages, the case becomes a public argument. Letters arrive. Theories multiply. By early and mid-March, the Illustrated London News is still printing correspondence and selecting from the flood of responses, which tells you how much this got under people's skin. The event is anchored to that night, but the debate keeps going because nobody can settle what they think made those marks, and once fear is in the room, it doesn't leave quickly. It's also worth remembering the setting. Devon doesn't get snow like this all the time, especially not the kind that lays clean and readable on the ground. When it does settle, it turns everything into evidence. Every step becomes a message. Every trail becomes a story. Snow makes the invisible suddenly visible, and it does it in a way that feels personal, like the land is speaking directly to you. And it's 1855, mid-Victorian Britain. You've got a strong religious framework in daily life, with sermons and moral interpretations still shaping how communities process odd events. But you also have the early buzz of modern, unseen forces entering popular conversation. Spiritualism is beginning to gather attention by the 1850s, and that cultural mix can encourage people to reach for a new, speculative language when something doesn't fit the everyday categories. It doesn't cause tracks in snow, but it does change how quickly people start thinking in terms of forces, presences, and signs. So what were people actually seeing? We have no photographs. The technology and timing make that unrealistic, and snow prints don't wait around for careful documentation. What we do have are contemporary newspaper descriptions, engravings, and later collections of letters and tracings gathered by local figures like the vicar H.T. Alacombe, which gives the whole thing a case file feel. It isn't a ghost story told 100 years later. It's a story argued about in its own time while the snow was still in people's hedgerows. Then come the explanations. Even in 1855, people argue for natural causes, because not everyone is ready to blame the devil. Some suggest animals like badgers. Some suggest hopping creatures, where melting and refreezing could blur a paw into something that reads like a hoof. Others float more exotic rumors, like kangaroos escaping from a private menagerie. And then there are the stranger mechanical ideas, like a balloon with trailing fittings leaving repeating marks. The range is almost the point. It tells you the prints didn't land neatly in one category, and that uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. And that brings us to the question everybody wants answered. How far did it go? You'll hear huge mileage claims. You'll hear a minimum route estimate in later analysis. But the honest truth is that we don't have one verified, continuously tracked line followed end-to-end by a single observer. What we have is a spread of sightings, gathered quickly, then knitted together by human logic into one dramatic route. One modern researcher who collated the source material argues the famous version is exaggerated, that the marks weren't uniform, weren't confined neatly, and that the most likely reality is messy and multiple. That doesn't kill the mystery. It sharpens it, because it tells you the story grew in real time, in public. So where does that leave us? Right here, in the place where a good mystery lives, balanced between something real and something imagined. On the morning of the 9th of February, 1855, people in Devon did not simply see ordinary tracks and decide to tell ghost stories for fun. They described something that felt unusual to them. Unusual enough that it became a county-wide talking point almost instantly. The devil idea appears quickly because hoof imagery already carries that association, and because the culture of the time had the language ready to go. Then the newspapers do what newspapers do. A local item becomes a national curiosity, and the strangest framing becomes the version that travels furthest. And maybe that's the real reason this case still works. The Devil Walked in Devon isn't just a spooky headline. It's a perfect example of how a rare night of weather can turn the landscape into a stage, and how quickly a community can build a shared narrative when the evidence looks like it's pointing at something impossible. Because whether the answer is animal, hoax, distortion, or something nobody ever thought of, the effect is the same. That night, Devon woke up to a set of marks in the snow that people couldn't rationalize fast enough. And in that gap between what they saw and what they could explain, imagination did what it always does. It filled the silence. It joined the dots. It walked the distance for them. So the question I'll leave you with is this. Snow like that isn't common in that part of England, not the kind that lays down clean and holds a perfect record. So is it possible this wasn't the first time? That something has moved through those lanes before, night after night, year after year, and on ordinary ground it left nothing you could ever point to. But that one winter night, Devon turned white, the world fell silent, and whatever it was finally left a trail. Or is the answer far simpler? A rare snowfall. Tracks warped by thaw and a refreeze. More than one animal crossing the same ground. A few details sharpened with every retelling. And a community already primed to see meaning in the oldest shape of fear. We may never know. The evidence thawed. The footprints vanished, but the idea didn't. So what are your thoughts on all this? Did the devil take a walk in Devon? But just before we go, there's one other possibility. One that didn't need to be invented after the fact, because it was already waiting there in the old stories. Already laid down in Devon folklore long before 1855, already whispered about in the dark lanes and on the edge of the moor. And somehow, when the snow finally gave everyone something to point at, it was almost completely ignored. Because Devon has older stories than hoof prints. Stories of a thing that moves through the night when the countryside is sleeping. A black hound, sometimes described as unearthly, tied to dread, night wandering, and the kind of fear you feel before you even know why you're afraid. And they have a name for it. They call it the Yeth Hound. And here's the detail that makes it hard to ignore. The Yeth Hound isn't a modern internet legend. It's rooted in older folklore, and Yeth Hounds even appear in collections compiled in the very same era as our footprint story, right in the mid-1800s. So did the snow finally capture the footprints of the legendary Yeth Hound? The timeline fits perfectly. The legend was already there, whispered in Devon long before 1855. So why didn't people connect the dots at the time? Did they not make that link? Or did the newspapers simply reach for the simplest headline, the one that would travel fastest? The Devil, Old Nick, a clean story for a messy mystery. Either way, it leaves us with one last unsettled thought. If something has been stalking Devon's lanes in the dark for generations, then maybe that February snowfall didn't create the story at all. Maybe it only revealed it. Okay, so that's one investigation we will come back to. In the meantime, you've been watching The Midnight Investigator. If this interests you, please like and subscribe. We will be back for more investigations. And until next time, question everything. Thanks for watching.